then be, just placed before scene 82. And so there's a sudden shift in how the edit works, and that in some way is to me, as a filmmaker, that's the best part of filmmaking, is finding the film after you've made it.
And you were talking about the other characters. I mean, I think as the series goes along, you kind of see obviously how his time on death row and in that environment would have shaped him. But also, as the series goes along, you start to see the town and how that, rather, the dark side of that town and the past and the present shaped him as well.
And you see how the crime itself affected them so dramatically. I mean, his sister has given up her life to plead his innocence and to secure his release. And now that this has occurred, there's a vortex is opened up. And how do you fill that now that your journey is fulfilled and over to a certain extent? There's a mother who, said farewell to her son and had to come to terms with that, had to know that one day legally my son will be murdered, and I'm getting to that, 20 years in, you're getting close to that door. He'd been through the appeals process, and that was pretty much it for him. So, and then suddenly the door opens, and there he is. I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that there was no meaningful embrace when his father died, when he experienced the death of that, and that she knows she's gone out and remarried and repopulated her home in many ways, and how is his return going to affect everyone there?
A stepbrother who's not particularly happy that change.
The alpha male that sees a possible threat to his kingdom. Be it a tire store in a small town, but his kingdom and
maybe his family
and his family possibly and so there's so many elements that we begin to. It's always very interesting when you're telling a story, especially when you're working on a documentary, about what aspects do you reveal at what time, because with the documentary, it might be non-linear. You don't just start it, he was 6 years old. Sure, if it's a biography piece, you might, but I've always found it's the hardest thing is to know when to reveal a certain element of story, and I think Ray is throughout the course of Rectify reveals those character arcs very beautifully and lyrically.
And you had asked him shortly after, I think, signing on for the part.
I did.
You asked him about innocence or guilt.
Yes,
Daniel,
I did.
and that's when I talk to people about the show, and maybe talking to you today, that's the question that immediately comes up. But you never asked that question.
I did ask.
You asked it, but you never got an answer.
I asked the question, are you going to tell me if he's, and perhaps I should have just said, is he? And I gave Ray the opportunity of pondering it, and maybe that was where the path started. Well, I don't think it's a mistake, but it certainly became an interesting path, because I asked him, I said, are you going to tell me? And he said, I'm not sure. Would you like to know? And I went away and I thought about it. I thought about the malleability of the human memory, and about the reality of what it is to live with a particular, notion of responsibility for somebody else's life, and the possibility that you took that life, or that you didn't, and you've been wrongfully convicted for that, for the crime of doing so. And I thought, my God, after 23 hours a day for that 20 years, you've pondered that. And every time you go back into a memory, you're bending it slightly, you're twisting it slightly. What is that memory of that night? The camera might tell us one thing, but I wonder if that even will be the truth, as to what occurred that night. And so I wondered about how to play a character if I didn't know whether he was innocent or guilty. Where does your motivation spring from? But then I started to also think about the idea that he's certainly responsible for that girl's welfare, in that night. And he would have thought back every single step of the way, the life you lead and the life you could have led, so to speak. And every right turn or left turn he'd made until the day he'd locked eyes on her, at how old, I don't know. And he would have thought about at what point could I change direction, and all this had been different. And I realized he would be living with such a burden of guilt that to further it by saying he's guilty of the actual crime itself would, in some ways, just add another anvil to the weight that he's carrying. And
he's carrying a lot of weight.
And he's carrying a lot of weight, He's carrying a lot of society's weight, too, And then, because the other aspect of it is perhaps he didn't do it. And if he didn't do it, and Ray was to tell me he did, it would break my heart that way. And if he told me that he didn't, then here's a man who's had his life stolen from him. It had the worst of the worst committed against him because somebody got it wrong. Somebody pointed the finger the wrong way. So, in some ways, it was almost too heartbreaking to find the answer. I'm sure I'll find it, and I'm sure, I'll probably have to sit down and have a strong drink.
Well, there's some questions coming up on, because there is a season 2.
Yes, there is.
And it'll be 10 episodes, is that correct?
10 episodes.
10 episodes, so a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Any
I have no
inklings?
indication of where it's going to go. For those of you that have seen it, I suppose, there's a certain element that we have to take into account of how the series ends. But, I'm at once overly excited by being involved in the process of re-exploring that world again, and I'm petrified of re-entering that psyche as well. Daniel didn't leave quickly. He was a unwelcome guest for a few weeks, and led up to maybe 6-7 weeks before I was finally able to really shake him out, and
when did you finish shooting the series?
I think we finished in mid-August or late August, and
Okay.
it wasn't until I was playing a sheriff opposite Ed Harris that I finally was able to go, well, now you're on the other side of the fence, all right, and, ham it up a little bit and have some fun, you're big old Arizona sheriff. So that was a lot of fun to get him out, but I know that I have to invite him back in, and perhaps I'll be a little bit careful next time. Because he asks questions of society, he asks questions of spirituality, he asks questions of loyalty, he asks questions of friendship, and he does certainly ask questions of guilt and innocence. And when you begin to, as Meisner might want to say, your brainstem can just start to believe that sort of grief, that sadness, that sense of loss is real. And you carry that around. I've got 2 beautiful young boys, and, I'm very happily partnered. And yet I'd find myself completely and utterly depressed, even though I just worked on this remarkable show with remarkable actors, and, and I'd played 50 Mad Men's before, but there was something about Daniel that the hook got into the brainstem and was playing with me, toying with me, and so it took a little bit to shake,
But I guess on some level
This is therapy.
Right, yeah. But on some level, then you were able to ever step out and go, if it's having that kind of effect on me, this is something special. Because I can actually see how this character, having watched these 6 episodes and what you must have really immersed yourself in for this sense of isolation, how that would have been like to live with for a while.
Well, I think, Glenn, any young actor, any older actor for that matter, asked to, or any person really for that matter, it doesn't have to be somebody who's trained in performance and the escapism of it, especially the escapism of it, but anyone who's asked to imagine a world, that's forfeit of everything that they love, of everything that cares for them, of any type of freedom whatsoever, including your own personal body and liberty, and it's a challenging, confronting reality, and like I said, I've played 50 Mad Men in the past, and you walk out of it, you go, you have a drink at the pub, and you get on with the next day, or you find a way through it.
Sure.
Perhaps it was the overreaching effect that Daniel's incarceration had on so many of the other characters that I wasn't the only sad one or mad one in the scene. I was witness to every bit of his journey in every single other actor's eyes and actions and movements, and so that made it very effective.
Even intensified it.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, that really intensified it. Whereas you weren't just a loony, you weren't just a sad man who was, oh, what's wrong? People knew what was at stake. People knew that, sanity was at stake. And so it was a bit of a tough bubble to burst.
We have a question from viewer Karina Rosario. Says she's very impressed with this show, the realness and the acting. She'd like to know a bit about Daniel's backstory. Can you give any insight on how you see him? I mean, we see him, maybe what was he like before that night, before he went away to prison?
It's a very good question, and in many ways that was the first thing that I wanted to discover and to explore. Yet at the same time, Ray was cautious about that because, as an ongoing possibility, we didn't want to write too much into that as yet. There was certainly the idea that Daniel was an outsider, that he was a man who understood, the gentler aspects of life in a community that, was a bit of an iron community in that sense, a bit of a man's community in that world. And he's a loner to a certain degree. And in many ways I could, empathize with that because, I moved to Australia when I was 9 years old and immediately found myself at the butt end of, you dumb Yank, and what have you. And so I in some ways retreated into my heritage, into, being, from North America. I held on to that because it was what I knew. And in one way, I wanted to reference the past with Daniel's voice because we never get to know Daniel's father, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if his cadence came from his dad, this man we don't know, and that he had a particular sing-song, and that my father was a broadcaster for the CBC, had a beautiful voice, and so I took the idea of that voice being his past, and that ambition to be somewhat similar to his father, to be standalone strong, but to be a good, decent man who was eyes wide open, in a part of the world that can be, shut at times,
When do you go back when does filming of the second season begin?
I think we're going to start in January because we had there was so much heat. It was like shooting a film in an oven, and I had just come from shooting a film in Bangkok about chefs behind the scenes of a fictitious cooking competition, and you couldn't imagine that you would find a hotter set, and suddenly arriving in Georgia, it was whatever the character wasn't going through, the sun was just slapping you down every day. So I think that they all, as a production,
so that really helped with the rhythm of the show, really.
It did to a certain extent. So maybe
slowed you down.
Maybe we might get hit by a snowstorm and see some different landscapes evolve.
Some different rhythms, some different.
Maybe I don't know.
But so January.
So
Ray must be.
I imagine he's huddled in a cave somewhere, just belting it out.
Plato's cave.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. I don't know what the pressure must be like for a writer to suddenly have their series renewed. I know that there's certainly an element, a very strong element to the backbone of what he wants to do with the follow-ups. But it's certainly another thing to receive the call. Okay, we'll need that 47 or 50-page script in a few weeks to start signing off on it and what have you. Unfortunately, I can't give any secrets away, apart from because I simply don't know the answer.
when you watched it, you said you watched it in a theater, all 6 episodes. That was before it had been renewed, right?
That's correct.
So the idea was that this could be a self-contained entity, and where it ends is where the story could end.
Ray wanted to develop this season like that, in case he found that he wasn't in the mindset to continue it himself, or that for whatever reason the show wasn't a success, that nobody tuned in or what have you. He didn't want to leave you with a sense of, oh, there are so many things that weren't answered. I mean, there's certainly a few things that keys have been suggested for the locks that we haven't seen, but I think the experience that people these days take home with their DVDs or the video on demands, and they binge watch it, gone are the days where people sort of sit around the water cooler talking about, are you going to see next week, and so forth, and nobody knows what the other one's up to in terms of, did you see Rectify? Oh yeah, when he died, that was because it's all DVD or video on demand. Nobody can keep up with each other. So. But to me, it's a remarkable palette of storytelling that's available, like I was saying, because you do have that period to tell that story, and I think a lot of great filmmakers are headed that direction, and hopefully with season 2, we'll get to the same quality that season 1 was able to get to.
He could take characters that had 3 scenes in these 6 episodes. I'm thinking of the woman, the hairstylist, who offered the gift of touch,
of tenderness,
of tenderness,
indeed.
The bookstore owner in the final episode.
Chet, you're elusive, Chet. Yes, absolutely. You could even go to the man in the 7-Eleven who, proffered him a kind word when he said, "Does this work?"
Yeah.
Knowing full well it was a giggle and trying to evoke a laugh, but he was a wonderful character. I talked to Ray straight away after meeting that actor. I said, can we not get him back in season 6 just to be sitting in the diner, in episode 6, for example. But
the waitress in the diner, she's another.
Well, she's another story you're going to follow, and I mean, Bobby Dean's story. What's his story? How he's going to evolve as a character in the coming series is going to be a dynamic, relationship, and how is Ted and
there's
Daniel, now that there's been a particular handshake of sorts, how is that relationship going to evolve?
It would seem to be that if you imagine that, you would think that it would just be something that's never spoken of again, but always there in the room. But you don't know.
The elephant in the room, maybe there's going to be a few this time around, rather than just Daniel's guilt or innocence. There's certainly not only one person guilty anymore. There's a few, and that offers an exciting landscape, to populate with the characters he's drawn up. So, yeah.
I've written a bit about the show, and from that received quite a bit of email just from people who feel passionate about those 6 episodes. Were you in Australia when it aired here,
I was in New York. I was there for the screening. We went, and it was very funny because we went to a bar and they projected onto the bar, and we watched about 30 seconds of it, and then everyone went back to drinking and talking over each other. It was fabulous. There was no sort of sense of pretentiousness, and it was just, we came together to tell a story, and we didn't know where it was going to go. We knew that Ray had crafted something quite different and quite unique, but we weren't aware that how it was going to affect anyone, and I don't think we can rest on that either. I think it's something that was just what it was, and we've got to, as Olivier said to Derek Jacobi when Jacobi asked him what's wrong in the wings one night after receiving a standing ovation midway through Othello, he said to Jacobi, well, what do I do for my next exit? And we've got to do a new series. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that It hasn't been heartwarming to see people's reactions and to see how touched people have been, but I certainly can't ride on that. You know, we have
Got
to
work
craft
to
it
do.
again, you know, and that's our job, and you know, hopefully we'll bring something back to the game that people want to watch again.
We had a last viewer question. Well, no, here's, maybe it is Gina Payton read that you are a Maple Leafs fan. Any
I
chance
am.
you might come to Michigan for the 2014 Winter Classic with them versus the Red Wings?
That would be good. I'd like to drop the puck. I'd like to be that famous that I could drop the puck. So get me an Oscar and I'll come.
Yeah.
My dad
Now
was
an added incentive for that second season,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, my dad was a member of the Hot Stove Club and wrote the program for the Maple Leafs when he worked in Toronto. And we grew up with the Maple Leafs, his family, guests, and friends, and so it's in your blood. You can't escape it. There's something about hockey that gets into Canadians' blood anyway. We have cells shaped like Maple Leafs, but there's something about being from Toronto and being from the home of the game that you can't get rid of. I still play to this day, you know. And, you know, I still pretend I'm Boyer Salming or Darryl Sittler or these great players. And recently, when they lost the game 7 against Boston, I went through more emotions in that last 10 minutes of the third period of Game 7 than I went through in the entire filming of Rectify. From 4-1 down to 5-4. It was a loss of Greek biblical proportion, you know, and so maybe next year. Yeah.
Would you be okay with the Kings repeating?
Oh, I've been down here.
Yeah.
You know, I've been down here to watch the Kings play. I saw Gretzky play here. You know, hockey's a hockey. It doesn't matter what color your jersey is, as long as there's a game on. You know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming down to our office.
Well,
and
thanks for having me.
Congratulations again on the success of that first season.
Thanks a lot.
right.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Thank you for joining us, and I'm Glenn Whipp with the LA Times. Thanks again to Aden Young from Rectify, and take care.